They thought they were just helping a shivering boy escape the cold on their doorstep. They had no idea they were sheltering the heir to the city's most powerful family, or that their small act of kindness would change their world forever. The rain didn't just fall that night, it waged war on the city. It hammered against the old brick of the row houses in Arthur Moretti's neighborhood, a relentless drumming that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the window panes in their frames. Arthur sat in his worn armchair, the pages of his newspaper illuminated by a single lamp, a small island of quiet warmth in the roaring dark. Across from him, his wife, Maria, meticulously mended the cuff of one of his old work shirts, her needle dipping in and out of the thick flannel with a practiced rhythm that had soothed him for nearly 50 years. They didn't have much, not anymore. His carpenter's pension was a thin blanket against the rising costs of everything, and their savings had dwindled to a whisper. But they had this, the quiet comfort of a shared life, the warmth of their small home, and the familiar sounds of a storm they could weather together. Then, a new sound cut through the rhythm of the rain and Maria's needle, a soft, desperate thud against their front door. It wasn't the confident knock of a neighbor or the crisp rap of a delivery. It was a sound of surrender, a weary weight leaning against the wood. Arthur lowered his paper, his eyes meeting Maria's. Her hands had stilled. In this neighborhood, a knock on the door after dark, especially in a storm like this, was not something to be taken lightly. Years of living on the edge of the city's forgotten corners had taught them caution. You didn't open your door to strangers. You didn't invite trouble in. Arthur was a man who lived by simple, solid rules like the ones he used to build houses: measure twice, cut once. Trust what you know. And trouble, he knew, often came disguised as need. He grunted, making a move to stay seated. It's nothing. The wind. But another sound followed, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching, like a stray dog begging for shelter. Maria set her sewing aside. Her heart operated on a different set of rules, ones that had little to do with caution and everything to do with compassion. "Arthur, someone's out there," he sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of a man who had seen too much of the world's harshness. He didn't want to see any more of it tonight, but he knew the look in Maria's eyes. It was the same look she'd had when she'd insisted they adopt a one-eyed cat from the shelter, the same one that led her to leave a plate of food on the back steps every night for anyone who might be hungry. It was a look that saw past the potential danger and straight to the possibility of pain. He pushed himself up from the chair, his joints protesting. "All right, Maria, I'll look. Just stay back." He moved to the door, his hand hovering over the deadbolt, every instinct screaming at him to ignore the sound, to let the storm handle it. But behind him was Maria, and for her, he would face any storm. He took a deep breath, turned the lock, and pulled the heavy door inward, just a crack. Before we continue the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. The first thing that hit him was the cold. A raw, wet gust of wind that smelled of asphalt and wet leaves invaded their warm living room, carrying the storm inside. And there, huddled on their small concrete stoop, was the source of the sound. It was a boy, or at least the shape of one. He couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, drenched to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He wasn't just wet. He was shivering with a violence that seemed to shake his entire frame, his arms wrapped around himself as if trying to hold his own bones together. He was wearing nothing but a thin t-shirt and dark jeans, clothes utterly inadequate for the tempest he was caught in. He didn't look up. He just knelt there, his head bowed, as if the last of his strength had been spent just getting to their door. Arthur's first thought was of trouble. The boy was too old to be lost, too thinly dressed to be out for any good reason. A runaway, a thief looking for a soft target. His hand tightened on the doorknob, ready to slam it shut, to lock out the cold and the unknown. But then he saw the boy's hands. They were clenched into tight fists, his knuckles white. But they weren't the hardened, calloused hands of a street fighter. They were slender, almost delicate, and clean, despite the grime of the storm. And there was something else. In the dim porch light, Arthur saw a dark, ugly bruise blooming on the boy's cheekbone, stark against his pale skin. This wasn't a predator. This was prey. Maria pushed gently past him. She didn't see a threat. She saw a child. "Oh, sweet heavens," she whispered, her voice thick with a sorrow that was older than the boy himself. She knelt, heedless of the cold rain spattering the doorway, and reached out a hand, not to touch him, but to simply offer a space of warmth near him. "Young man,
"Can you hear me? You need to come inside." The boy flinched at her voice, a small, scared animal, but he didn't move. His shivering intensified, a low chattering of teeth, the only sound he made. Arthur's resolve crumbled. He looked at his wife, her face etched with worry, and then at the boy, a picture of absolute misery. What kind of man would he be if he left him out there? What kind of world had they built if a boy could freeze on your doorstep and you simply close the door?
Maria, get a blanket," he said, his voice gruff to hide the crack of emotion in it. "And put the kettle on." He opened the door wide, the wind howling into their home. He reached down, his strong carpenter's hands gently taking the boy's arm. The boy's skin was like ice. He was surprisingly light as Arthur helped him stumble to his feet and guided him over the threshold, out of the raging storm and into the fragile sanctuary of their lives. He closed the door, the deadbolt clicking into place with a sound of finality. The storm was now locked out, but Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that they had just invited a different, far more complicated one in. Maria wrapped the boy in the thickest quilt they owned, a patchwork of memories and worn fabrics she had stitched together over decades. She sat him in Arthur's armchair, close to the old radiator that hissed and clanked with comforting warmth. The boy sank into the chair, the quilt dwarfing his thin frame. He still hadn't spoken a word. He just sat there, trembling, his dark eyes wide and fixed on some point in the middle distance, as if replaying a scene only he could see. Maria returned from the kitchen with a steaming mug of sweet tea, her movements gentle and deliberate. She had a way about her, a quiet grace that could calm a frantic bird or coax a wilting plant back to life. She knelt before him and held out the mug. "Here, drink this. It will warm you from the inside out." The boy's eyes flickered towards her, and for the first time, Arthur saw a spark of something other than fear in them. It was a deep, profound wariness, the look of someone who had learned that kindness often came with a price. He slowly reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the mug. His hands were shaking so badly that the tea sloshed over the rim. He took a sip, then another, the hot liquid seeming to thaw some of the ice within him. His shivering began to subside, replaced by a heavy exhaustion that slumped his shoulders. "Thank you," he finally whispered. The voice was hoarse, barely audible, but it was clear and surprisingly steady. Arthur watched from the doorway of the kitchen, his arms crossed over his chest. His caution hadn't vanished. It had simply shifted. The boy wasn't an immediate threat, but he was a riddle, a blank page dropped into their quiet story. "What's your name, son?" Arthur asked, his tone even, not unkind, but not entirely welcoming either. The boy looked at him, his gaze sharp and intelligent. It was the look of an old soul in a young body. There was a long pause, a moment where Arthur was certain he wouldn't answer, that he would retreat back into his shell of silence. "Nico," he said at last. Just Nico. No last name, no explanation for where he came from or why he was collapsed on their stoop in the middle of a biblical downpour. Maria, ever the diplomat, placed a gentle hand on Arthur's arm. "That's a good strong name," she said, smiling at the boy. "Well, Nico, you're safe here tonight. The storm won't last forever." But as Nico looked around their small, humble living room, at the faded photographs on the mantelpiece, the worn-out rug, the faint water stain on the ceiling, Arthur saw a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was something closer to assessment, a quiet inventory of his surroundings. It was the look of someone who understood that safety was a temporary condition and that some storms, once they find you, never really pass. He was a puzzle, and Arthur had a sinking feeling that finding the missing pieces would put them all in danger. The small spare room at the back of the house had been their son's years ago, before he'd grown up and moved west, starting a life that rarely circled back to this quiet, forgotten street. Now it served as storage for things Maria couldn't bear to part with, and a place for Arthur's dusty architectural books. Maria had remade the bed with their best linens, the ones she saved for holidays, and placed a glass of water on the nightstand. Nico had changed into a set of Arthur's old soft pajamas, which hung loosely on his slender frame, making him look even younger and more vulnerable. He moved with a strange economy of motion, a quietness that was almost unnatural for a teenager. He folded his wet clothes into a neat, tight pile, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed by Arthur. When Maria wished him good night, he simply nodded, his eyes cast down. "Thank you for everything," he murmured, the words feeling insufficient for the monumental kindness they had shown him. As they closed his door, leaving it slightly ajar, Maria turned to Arthur in the dim hallway. "He's just a boy, Arthur, a lost, scared boy." Arthur didn't answer right away. He looked at the closed door, a barrier between his predictable world and the unknown. "Maybe," he said softly, "but lost things have a way of being looked for, and the people who come looking aren't always friendly." His words hung in the air, a premonition that chilled Maria more than the storm ever could. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but the silence in the house felt heavy, charged with the presence of the stranger in their son's old bed. He thought about their own struggles. The letter from the bank about the mortgage adjustment sat on the kitchen table, a stark reminder of their financial precarity. The roof had been leaking for months, a slow drip, drip, drip into a bucket in the attic every time it rained, a repair they simply couldn't afford. They were barely holding on, and now they had taken in another mouth to feed, another life to worry about. Was it foolish? Was Maria's boundless compassion going to be the thing that finally sank them? He crept out of bed and walked down the hallway, pausing at Nico's door. He peered through the crack. The boy wasn't sleeping. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back ramrod straight, staring at the window where the faint city lights reflected off the wet glass. He wasn't relaxed or at peace. He was on watch. It was the posture of a soldier, a sentinel. Arthur's unease deepened. This was no ordinary runaway. This boy was hiding from something, or someone, and Arthur had a terrible feeling that by opening their door, he had invited that something to come find them. Morning arrived grey and washed clean, the air tasting of damp earth and renewed quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind glistening streets and a sky the colour of slate. Arthur rose early, as he always did, the habit of a lifetime of labour ingrained in his bones. He expected to find the house as it was, with the boy still asleep in the back room. Instead, he was met with the smell of coffee and the quiet hum of activity. Nico was in their kitchen. He had found the old percolator and brewed a pot of coffee, rich and dark, just the way Arthur liked it. He was standing by the counter, carefully, almost surgically, reassembling the loose handle on one of Maria's favorite frying pans, using only a butter knife as a makeshift screwdriver. He moved with a focused intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as Arthur entered, his expression guarded, as if expecting to be scolded for taking a liberty. "The handle was wobbly," Nico said, his voice quiet. "I thought I could fix it. I hope you don't mind." Arthur was momentarily speechless. The boy had not only made coffee, he had noticed a small, broken thing in their home and had taken it upon himself to mend it. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes. It was an act of contribution, of wanting to earn his keep. "No," Arthur said, his voice softer than he intended. "I don't mind at all." He poured himself a cup of coffee. It was perfect, strong, hot, and without a hint of bitterness. He watched as Nico gave the screw a final, satisfying twist and tested the handle. It was solid. Maria came in a few minutes later, her face breaking into a warm smile when she saw the scene. "Well, look at you, already making yourself useful." Nico gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a hint of a blush coloring his cheeks. He wasn't accustomed to praise. Over breakfast, a simple meal of toast and eggs, a fragile normalcy began to settle over them. They learned little more about him. He offered no details about his family or his home. When Maria asked where he was from, he just vaguely gestured east and said, "Across the bridge." It was an answer that was also a wall. Yet, in his silence, there were other revelations. He was observant, his eyes missing nothing. He noticed the slight limp in Arthur's walk, the way Maria favored her left hand when lifting something heavy, and he was respectful to a degree that was almost jarring in a boy his age. He called them Sir and Ma'am, and when he spoke, it was with a quiet deference that felt both genuine and meticulously trained. He was a paradox, a boy with the manners of a gentleman and the haunted eyes of a fugitive. And as the day wore on, another strange detail emerged. A black sedan, a Lincoln with tinted windows, began to pass by their house. Once could be a coincidence, twice was noteworthy. By the third time it glided slowly down their street, its occupants invisible behind the dark glass. Arthur knew. They were being watched. The people Nico was hiding from, they were no longer a vague and distant threat. They were here. The presence of the black sedan cast a long shadow over the fragile peace in the Moretti household. It didn't do anything overtly threatening. It would just appear cruising slowly down their block, sometimes parking for a few minutes at the corner before moving on. But its message was clear. "We know where you are. We are watching." Arthur felt a knot of cold fear tighten in his stomach every time he saw it. He tried to keep his worry from Maria, but she noticed his new habit of peering through the curtains, the way his jaw would clench whenever a car slowed down outside. Nico noticed too. He became even more withdrawn, his shoulders perpetually tensed, as if bracing for a blow. He stopped sitting by the front window and took to spending more time in the small backyard, a tiny patch of cracked concrete and stubborn weeds, as if the open sky felt safer than the street. The tension in the house was a low hum, a constant undercurrent of unspoken fear. And it was in this charged atmosphere that a different kind of trouble arrived, this one loud, brash, and familiar. A local troublemaker, a young man named Donnie Gallo, who led a small crew of neighborhood delinquents, had recently decided that the Moretti's Corner was his new territory. He and his friends would loiter on their steps, leaving behind a trail of litter and crude remarks. Arthur had tried to reason with them once, asking them politely to move on. He'd been met with a sneer and a string of insults that had left him feeling old and powerless. The police were no help. Donnie's antics were too minor for them to bother with. So the Morettis endured it, another small indignity in a life that seemed to be full of them. One afternoon, Arthur was returning from the pharmacy with a refill of Maria's heart medication when he found Donnie and two of his friends blocking the walkway to his front door. They were loud, obnoxious, and passing a bottle between them. "Excuse me, boys," Arthur said, his voice firm. "I need to get through." Donnie, a wiry kid with mean eyes and a misplaced sense of importance, stepped in front of him. "What's the hurry, old man? Got a hot date?" His friends snickered. Arthur felt a flash of anger, but he suppressed it. He was too old for this. He just wanted to get inside to his wife. "Just let me pass, son." Donnie took a swig from the bottle and deliberately blew the fumes in Arthur's face. "You gotta pay the toll, Gramps. This is our stoop now." It was then that the front door opened. Nico stepped out, closing it softly behind him. He didn't look at Donnie's friends. His eyes were fixed solely on their leader. He was calm, his hands loose at his sides, but there was an intensity in his gaze that was utterly commanding. He didn't say a word, he just stood there, watching. Donnie Gallo was used to being the source of fear, not the subject of it. He thrived on intimidation, on the way older folks would shrink away from him, the way other kids would either join him or avoid his gaze. He wasn't prepared for the utter stillness of the boy who now stood on the porch. Nico wasn't big or physically imposing. He was just there, and his silence was more unnerving than any threat. Donnie puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his dominance. "Well, look what we have here. The old man's got himself a little guard dog. What are you going to do, kid?" "Bark at me." His friends laughed, but the sound was hollow, uncertain. Nico took one step forward, moving from the porch to the top step. The slight elevation change made him seem taller. He still hadn't spoken. He just held Donnie's gaze, his dark eyes unblinking. The air grew thick and heavy, the usual neighborhood sounds, a distant siren, children playing down the street, seemed to fade away. It was just the five of them, locked in a silent standoff. Arthur, standing beside Donnie, could feel the shift. The boyish bravado was draining out of Donnie Gallo like air from a punctured tire. This wasn't the kind of confrontation he understood. There were no fists, no shouted insults. It was a battle of wills, and he was losing. Finally, Nico spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the tension with the sharpness of glass. "He asked you to move," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with an authority that seemed to come from a place of absolute certainty. "This is his home. You are not welcome here. Leave. Now." The finality in his tone was chilling. There was no room for negotiation. Donnie's sneer faltered. He looked at Nico, really looked at him, and for the first time he seemed to see past the quiet boy and glimpse the something else that lay beneath. Something hard and unyielding. Something dangerous. He glanced at his friends for support, but they were already backing away, their bluster gone, replaced by a primal instinct to be somewhere else. Donnie hesitated for a second longer, his pride warring with a burgeoning sense of self-preservation. Nico took another slow step down, his expression unchanging. That was all it took. Donnie broke eye contact, muttered something unintelligible under his breath, and shoved past Arthur, nearly stumbling in his haste to get away. His friends followed, practically running down the street. In less than a minute, they were gone. The street was quiet again. Nico turned to Arthur, his face unreadable. "Are you all right, sir?" Arthur could only nod, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just watched a 17-year-old boy, with nothing but his gaze and a few quiet words, dismantle a neighborhood bully who had terrorized them for weeks. He looked at Nico, at the polite, helpful boy who fixed their pans and drank their tea, and he felt a profound and terrifying certainty. This boy was not just hiding from trouble, he was born from it. The incident with Donnie Gallo changed the atmosphere in the house again. The fragile normalcy they had built was shattered. Maria, who had only heard the confrontation from inside, saw it as proof of Nico's good character. "He protected you, Arthur. He stood up for you. He has a good heart." But Arthur saw it differently. He saw a strategic, controlled display of power. It wasn't the impulsive act of a brave teenager. It was the calculated move of someone who understood intimidation on a cellular level. It was like watching a lion cub swatting at a fly. The casual, almost bored way it asserted its dominance was more frightening than any roar. Where had a boy learned to command that kind of fear? Arthur's suspicion, which had been a quiet hum in the back of his mind, now grew into a roar of its own. He started watching Nico more closely, not as a guardian, but as a detective. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way Nico always sat with his back to a wall, facing the door. The way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, cataloging exits and potential threats. The way he never, ever spoke on the phone inside the house, always stepping out into the small backyard, his voice too low to be overheard. He was living under their roof, but he wasn't really with them. He was in a fortress of his own making, and they were inside it with him. One evening, while Nico was out back on one of his quiet phone calls, Arthur felt a desperate need for answers. He knew it was a violation of trust, an act of betrayal against the boy who had, in his own way, protected him. But the fear for Maria was a physical ache in his chest. He slipped into Nico's room. It was spotlessly clean, almost sterile. His few belongings were neatly arranged on the dresser. There was nothing to see, but Arthur's carpenter eyes were trained to notice imperfections, things that were out of place. He ran his hand under the mattress and felt it, a small, hard object tucked deep inside. He pulled it out. It was a wallet, not a teenager's wallet, stuffed with movie tickets and school IDs. It was a slim, expensive leather wallet. His hands trembled as he opened it. There was no driver's license, no photos, just a thick wad of cash, all crisp $100 bills, and a single, folded piece of paper. With a sense of dread, he unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a photograph, slightly worn at the creases. It showed a group of men dressed in dark, well-tailored suits, standing outside a restaurant. And in the center of the group, his arm around a much younger Nico, was a man Arthur recognized from the old newspaper clippings. It was Stefano Bellini, the head of the Bellini crime family, the most powerful and most feared man in the city. Nico wasn't just connected to them, he was one of them. The photograph felt like a block of ice in Arthur's hand, the world tilted on its axis. Stefano Bellini. The name was a legend in these parts of the city, a whisper of power that controlled unions, businesses, and politicians. He was a ghost who was everywhere at once, a man whose influence was as pervasive and invisible as the air itself. And his grandson, the boy with the haunted eyes, was sleeping in their son's bed. Every strange detail about Nico clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His unnatural quietness, his hyper-awareness, his respectful but distant demeanor, the way he dismantled Donnie Gallo without raising his voice. It wasn't good manners. It was training. It was the discipline of a world Arthur could barely comprehend, a world of loyalty, silence, and swift, brutal consequences. The black sedan wasn't looking for a runaway. It was surveillance, protection. They were keeping tabs on their lost prince. Arthur's blood ran cold. He thought of Maria, of her trusting nature, her open heart. He had let this danger into their home, into her life. What had they stumbled into? A family dispute? A gang war? Was Nico in danger, or was he the danger? Arthur carefully folded the photo, slid it back into the wallet, and pushed it deep under the mattress, exactly where he'd found it. He backed out of the room, his mind reeling. He couldn't tell Maria. It would terrify her. She saw a boy, and he wanted desperately for her to be able to keep seeing just a boy. But he couldn't unknow what he now knew. The weight of the secret was immense. That night, he confronted Nico. He waited until Maria was asleep, then found the boy in the kitchen, staring out the window into the dark backyard. "I know who you are," Arthur said, his voice low and strained. Nico didn't turn around, but his body went rigid.
"I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice flat. "Don't!" Arthur snapped, his fear making him sharp. "Don't lie to me. Not in this house. I saw the picture with your grandfather." A long, heavy silence filled the small kitchen. Nico finally turned to face him. The guarded look was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-deep weariness that was heartbreaking in someone so young. "I'm sorry," he whispered.
"I never wanted to bring this to your door." "What is it?" Arthur demanded, his voice cracking. "What have you brought to our door, son?" Nico looked at the floor, unable to meet Arthur's terrified gaze. "You have to believe me," he said, his voice pleading. "You and Mrs. Moretti, you are not in danger from me or from them. But you can't tell anyone I'm here, not a soul. It's a code. If you break it—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implied threat hung between them, more powerful than any spoken word. Omerta, the code of silence. They weren't just sheltering a boy anymore. They were accomplices. and the price of their kindness was now a silence that could cost them everything. The days that followed were thick with a tension that was almost unbearable. Arthur lived in a state of constant, gnawing anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that backfired down the street, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He was trapped between the rock of his conscience and the hard place of the Bellini family. He now understood that the kindnesses that began to appear were not random acts of fate. One morning, Maria went to the local grocery store, a place where she had a small line of credit she and Arthur painstakingly paid down each month. When she got to the counter, her basket full of staples, the owner, Mr. Carlucci, just smiled and waved her off. "It's all taken care of, Maria." She was stunned. "But who?" Mr. Carlucci just shrugged, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "A friend of the neighborhood. A good friend." A few days later, a package arrived. It wasn't delivered by the mailman. A quiet man in a dark coat simply left it on their stoop, knocked once, and was gone before Arthur could even get to the door. Inside were several vials of Maria's heart medication, a 3-month supply, far more than their insurance would ever cover at once. There was no note, no sender. It was a gift, but it felt like a message. "We know what you need, we are watching, we are providing." It wasn't comforting, it was terrifying. Their lives were no longer their own. They were being managed, their needs anticipated and met by a shadowy organization whose motives Arthur couldn't begin to fathom. He felt like a fly caught in a spider's web. The more they struggled, the more entangled they became. He had thought their problems were financial, a leaky roof, a tight budget. Now, he would have given anything to have those simple worries back. This was a debt of a different kind, one they could never repay. Maria, in her innocence, saw these events as small miracles, blessings from a universe that had finally decided to smile on them. "The world is a better place than you think, Arthur," she'd say, her eyes shining with gratitude. Her naivete was both a comfort and a torture. He couldn't bring himself to shatter her beautiful view of the world, to tell her their blessings were coming from a source steeped in violence and fear. So he carried the burden alone, the secret a toxic weight in his gut. The boy Nico remained silent, a ghost in their house, and the black sedan continued its slow, silent patrol, a constant reminder that they were no longer just the Morettis. They were keepers of a secret, wards of the Bellini family, and Arthur had no idea if they were being protected or if they were simply being held in a gilded cage until their purpose was served. The breaking point came in the form of a formal-looking envelope, hand-delivered and left propped against their front door. It was made of thick, creamy cardstock, and on the front, in elegant cursive, was written simply, "Mr. and Mrs. Moretti." Arthur's hand shook as he picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy. He knew instinctively that this was it. The silent observation was over. Inside, he found a single card. The message was brief and chillingly polite. "Mr. Bellini requests the pleasure of your company. A car will be waiting for you tomorrow evening at 7. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. When he showed it to Nico, the boy's face went pale. All the composure, the trained stillness he normally wore like armor, fell away, revealing the terrified teenager underneath. "No," he whispered. "He can't. You can't go." The fear in Nico's eyes was raw and genuine. He wasn't afraid for them. Arthur realized he was afraid of what his grandfather might do. This was the moment Arthur had been dreading, the moment their quiet lives intersected directly with the formidable power of Stefano Bellini. "We don't have a choice, son," Arthur said, his voice grim. "People like your grandfather don't make requests you can refuse." He finally had to tell Maria. He sat her down at the kitchen table, the invitation lying between them, and explained everything. He told her about the photograph, about Nico's true identity, about the black sedan and the gifts that had been appearing. He watched as the color drained from her face, her beautiful belief in miracles crumbling into a harsh, terrifying reality. But after the initial shock, she didn't panic. She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm and steady. "We did the right thing, Arthur," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We took in a child who needed help. Whatever happens, we did the right thing." Her strength was a lifeline to him in that moment. The next evening, as the clock ticked towards 7, the house was filled with a dreadful silence. They dressed in their Sunday best, the clothes they wore for weddings and funerals. It felt, morbidly, like it could be for either. Nico paced the living room like a caged animal. "You don't understand," he pleaded with them. "My grandfather, he has his own rules, a code of honor. He might see what you did as interference, as hiding what belongs to him." Arthur looked at the boy, at the agony twisting his features. "And what did you do, Nico? Why did you run?" Nico finally broke. Tears streamed down his face. There was a test, an initiation. Something I was supposed to do to prove I was worthy, that I was strong enough. And I couldn't. I couldn't do it. I ran. It was an act of weakness, of dishonor. He'll see you as the people who enabled my cowardice. At precisely 7 o'clock, the black sedan pulled up to their curb. It didn't glide by this time. It stopped, its engine a low, menacing purr. A man in a dark suit got out and opened the back door, waiting for them. Arthur took Maria's hand. It was cold as ice. Together they walked out of their small, safe home and into the heart of the storm. The ride was silent and unnervingly smooth. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, a world away from the knot of fear in Arthur's stomach. Maria sat beside him, her posture erect, her hand clutching a small rosary in her coat pocket. They were driven not to a dark warehouse or a menacing back alley, but to one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, a place of old stone mansions and manicured lawns. The car pulled through a set of wrought iron gates and up a winding driveway to a house that looked more like a museum than a home. The man who had driven them led them through a grand foyer with marble floors and oil paintings, the silence of the house amplifying the sound of their own nervous breathing. He stopped before a set of tall, dark wood doors and knocked once. A voice from within, deep and gravelly, called out, "Enter!" The room was a library, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. A fire crackled in a large stone fireplace, casting a warm, dancing light on the room. And sitting in a high-backed leather chair behind a massive oak desk was Stefano Bellini. He was older than in the photograph, his hair a shock of silver, his face a roadmap of a long, complicated life. But his eyes, dark and piercing, held an undiminished power. He didn't look like a thug or a gangster. He looked like a king. He gestured to the 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Moretti, thank you for coming. Please, sit." His voice was calm, almost gentle, which was somehow more intimidating than if he had shouted. They sat, 2 small, ordinary people in a room that radiated wealth and absolute authority. Mr. Bellini steepled his fingers, his gaze moving from Arthur to Maria, studying them with an unnerving intensity. "My grandson," he began, his voice even. "He has been a guest in your home." "We were just trying to help," Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. He was cold and scared. Bellini nodded slowly. "I am aware. We have been observing. You fed him, you clothed him, you gave him shelter. You fixed the loose handle on my daughter's favorite frying pan, which he apparently took with him." Arthur's eyes widened. They knew everything. "And when that worthless punk Donny Gallo accosted you," Bellini continued, his voice hardening slightly, "my grandson stepped in. But more importantly, you did not call the police. You handled it. You kept it within the neighborhood. You kept silent." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. "You found my grandson, a boy with no explanation for who he was or why he was on your doorstep, and you did not ask questions of the outside world. You did not invite strangers into our business. You gave him sanctuary. That is a concept I understand. That is a concept I value above all others." Arthur's heart was hammering against his ribs. He had no idea where this was going, whether it was a prelude to a threat or something else entirely. He had prepared for anger, for accusations. He was not prepared for this quiet, methodical analysis of their actions. Stefano Bellini leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly. "My grandson, Nico, has a good heart. Your wife saw that, Mrs. Moretti, but it is a heart that has been shielded, softened. We live by a different code, one that requires a certain hardness. He was given a task to prove he was ready to carry the weight of our name, a task not of violence, but of resolve. To collect a debt from a man who had betrayed our trust, not to harm him, but to look him in the eye and deliver a message of consequence. It was a test of will. And as he told you, he failed. He hesitated, he ran. A flicker of profound disappointment, the pain of a patriarch whose heir had faltered, crossed Bellini's face before being replaced by his stoic mask. He ran from his duty, from his family. He came to your door as a boy who had shamed his name. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the grand, silent room. "In our world," he continued, his voice low and deliberate, "there is nothing more important than family and honor. When you took my grandson in, you did not know who he was. You were not obligated. You are not one of us. You are, forgive me, simple people. Yet you showed him a loyalty that he in that moment had failed to show his own blood. You gave him a home when he felt he had lost his. You protected him, not with guns or with threats, but with warmth, with soup, with a clean bed. This," he said, tapping a finger on his desk for emphasis, "is a powerful thing, more powerful than fear." Arthur and Maria could only listen, stunned into silence. This powerful man, this feared leader of the city's underworld, was not angry with them. He was dissecting their simple act of compassion as if it were a complex business strategy. "Then," Bellini said, a slight, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, "you discovered who he was, and still you kept our secret. Mr. Moretti, you knew the danger, yet you chose silence. Omerta. You honored a code that was not your own. You respected the sanctity of a family's private affairs." He looked directly at Arthur. And for the first time, Arthur saw not a crime boss, but a grandfather. A patriarch whose primary concern was the integrity of his lineage. "You have done the Bellini family a great service. You have shown my grandson that strength is not just about hardness. It is also about compassion. That honor is not just about fulfilling a duty, but about protecting those in your care. You gave my family a lesson that I perhaps had failed to teach. And the Bellini family, we always pay our debts." He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a large manila envelope, sliding it across the polished wood towards them. Arthur stared at it, his throat suddenly dry. He had a feeling that whatever was inside that envelope was going to shatter their simple world into a million pieces. Arthur reached out a trembling hand and took the envelope. It was heavy, thick with documents. He looked at Mr. Bellini, a silent question in his eyes. "Open it," the old man said gently. With fumbling fingers, Arthur undid the clasp. Inside, the first thing he saw was the deed to their house, but it was a new deed, crisp and official. At the bottom, where the bank's name should have been, it was stamped in bold red letters, "Paid in full." His breath caught in his throat. He shuffled through the other papers. There was a certificate of deposit from a downtown bank, made out in his and Maria's names, for an amount that made his head spin. It was more money than he had earned in a lifetime of hard labor. There was a contract from the city's most reputable roofing company, also marked "Paid in full," for a complete replacement of their roof and gutters. And finally, there was a small, simple card. On it was a private phone number. Below it, a single sentence was inscribed, "For anything you ever need." He looked up at Stefano Bellini, speechless. Tears were streaming down Maria's face, silent and steady. This was beyond generosity. This was a life-altering, world-reshaping act of reciprocity. We can't accept this, Arthur stammered, the words feeling foolish as soon as they left his mouth. Bellini held up a hand. You cannot refuse it, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is not a gift.
It is a payment, a recognition. My family was in a moment of crisis, of shame. You provided stability. You absorbed the dishonor and returned to me a grandson who is humbled, who is wiser. That is a service for which there is no price. This, he gestured to the envelope, is merely a token. He rose from his chair and walked around the desk, his presence filling the room. He stood before Maria and took her hand, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of old-world respect. Mrs.
Moretti, he said, his voice softening. Your compassion is a rare and valuable thing. Do not ever let the world convince you otherwise. He then turned to Arthur. And you, sir, you are a man of principle. You understood respect without needing it explained to you. You are an honorable man. A side door to the library opened, and Nico stepped in. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he stood tall, his shoulders back. He looked at his grandfather, then at the Morettis. There was no fear left in his expression, only a profound and solemn gratitude. Nico will be staying with you for 1 more week, Mr. Bellini announced. Not as a fugitive, but as a guest. He will personally oversee the start of the work on your roof. It is his responsibility to see this debt is honored correctly. After that, he will come home. His education will continue. The implication was clear. Nico was being given a second chance, and his first lesson was in seeing through an act of honorable repayment. Arthur looked from the old man to the young boy, and he finally understood. They hadn't just been caught in the middle of a family drama. They had become a part of it. They had, in their own small way, become family. The week that followed was surreal. The day after their meeting with Mr. Bellini, a crew of workmen descended upon their small house. They were quiet, efficient, and impeccably polite. They stripped the old, leaking roof and replaced it with the best materials money could buy. They repaired the water damage in the attic, repainted the ceilings, and even fixed a loose gutter that had been annoying Arthur for years. And through it all, Nico was there. He wasn't just watching, he was working. He carried shingles, he cleaned up debris, he brought the workers coffee and water. He worked with a quiet determination, his actions a form of apology and gratitude that words could never express. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence. The sudden, high-quality renovation of the Morettis' modest home, coupled with the complete and permanent disappearance of Donny Gallo and his crew from the corner, became the stuff of local legend. No one asked any questions. They didn't need to. In neighborhoods like this, some things were simply understood. During that week, the dynamic in the house shifted one last time. The tension was gone, replaced by a strange, new kind of familiarity. Nico was no longer a mysterious fugitive. He was just Nico, a quiet boy who enjoyed Maria's cooking and listened intently to Arthur's stories about his days as a carpenter. They were no longer his protectors, they were his friends, his mentors. They talked, really talked, for the first time. He told them about his mother, Bellini's daughter, who had died when he was young. He spoke of the immense pressure of his family name, the weight of expectation that had been on his shoulders since birth. He didn't make excuses for his actions, but he explained them, and in doing so he became not the heir to a criminal empire, but simply a boy trying to find his way in a complicated world. On his last day, as the black sedan waited at the curb, this time not as a guard, but as a chariot, he stood at the front door with them. He looked different. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a newfound resolve. He had learned something in their small, quiet house that he could never have learned in his grandfather's mansion. He hugged Maria tightly, burying his face in her shoulder for a moment. "Thank you," he whispered. He then turned to Arthur and extended his hand. Arthur ignored it and pulled the boy into a rough, fatherly embrace. "Be a good man, Nico," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just a strong one, a good one." Nico nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I will try, sir." He walked to the car, got in, and as it pulled away, he looked back at them, a silent promise passing between the boy who had lost his way and the elderly couple who had shown him a different path home. Life for Arthur and Maria Moretti settled into a new rhythm, a new reality. The constant grinding worry about money was gone, lifted from their shoulders like a physical weight. Their home was warm and dry, secure against any storm. But the changes were more than just financial. They were different. They moved through their days with a quiet confidence they hadn't possessed before. They were still the same humble, kind people, but they were no longer invisible, no longer felt powerless. They were under a shield of protection, a silent and powerful gratitude that followed them wherever they went. Mr. Carlucci at the grocery store always had a smile for them. The mail was always delivered right to their door. Their little corner of the world had become an oasis of quiet respect. They never used the private number on the card. They didn't need to. Their act of kindness had already paid dividends beyond anything they could have imagined. Sometimes a package would arrive containing the finest olive oil from Italy or a box of pastries from the best bakery in the city. There was never a note, but they always knew who it was from. And every year on the anniversary of the storm, a single, perfect white orchid would be delivered to their door. A silent acknowledgement of the night, a shivering boy found sanctuary and a family found its honor again. Arthur often sat in his armchair, the house quiet, and thought about that night. He had been so close to keeping the door locked, to letting the storm handle the boy on his stoop. His caution and fear had almost won. But Maria's heart, her simple, unwavering compassion, had opened the door. It had opened their lives to fear and uncertainty, but it had also led them to this profound peace, this unexpected grace. They had given a stranger a blanket and a cup of tea, and in return had been given a future. It was a strange and beautiful equation, one that defied logic but affirmed a deeper truth about the world. That sometimes the smallest act of kindness, offered without expectation of reward, can ripple outward and change everything, weaving a web of loyalty and family in the most unexpected of places. They hadn't just sheltered a boy, they had been welcomed into a family, bound not by blood, but by a code of honor they hadn't even known they were following. What would you have done if you were Arthur and Maria? Would you have opened the door that night? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by their story, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. You never know whose life you might change.